This is the Under the Ring Report. And now, the anonymous general managers of wrestling podcasting, John the Flesh Wound and Cousin Tom.
All right, wrestling fans, welcome back to the Under the Ring Report. And with me, Cousin Tom, how you doing?
Hey, great. How are you?
I can't complain. I think I'm finally done with my New Japan withdrawal after we talked about that last week and spending the week before that watching New Japan wrestling way too much.
Wrestling never hurts to be watched over and over again.
Yeah, very true. Now, what we're going to do this week, and something we're going to try and do monthly, is a new segment called Under the Gimmick. And you know, it could go any way, but this week, we're going to talk about a gimmick that, I don't know about you, but it still leaves me scratching my head in that what the hell was Vince thinking? And that gimmick is Akeem the African Dream. You tell people a little bit about the one-man gang first.
All right. Well, I remember the one-man gang debuted in 87. Is that right?
I believe you were right, yes.
Okay, 87. You know, it came out, had the tattoos on the side of his head, intimidating, had Slick as his manager, came out as a monster heel, you know, just come out squashing people. And then for some reason, transitioned into Akeem the African Dream, and he's no more African than Vanilla Ice. So
well,
I'm not sure what Vince was thinking on that.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, a 6'9", 450-pound white man who, seriously, as the one-man gang, was a bad son of a bitch, just beating people up. And I still remember, I think it was on WWF Superstars, and Mean Gene was in this alley with a big can that was on fire, and he was with Slick. And all of a sudden, Slick's saying, there's a new man going to be reborn, all this crap. And there are dancers out there. And all of a sudden, this big cloud of smoke with fire. And here comes Akeem. He's got a little yellow hat and all this crap, and he's jiving and stuff. And I don't know what the hell they were thinking when this happened. I remember watching it, and shoot, I was probably 15 when he debuted, maybe. Right. And I remember just sitting there with my mouth open going, what in the hell is going on?
You know, back then, they would throw a gimmick at you that was just corny, out of this world, like unbelievable, and we bought it up.
Yeah,
we were kids.
Yeah,
you know, and so they're like, "Hey, we'll try this with him and see what happens." And you know, you think about some of the other things they had at the time. You know, Bushwhackers.
Yep.
Hillbilly Jim. You know, Honky Tonk Man was. You know, he was getting to his later stages, but they had the Quebecers, the Mounties. I mean, they Vince had a plethora of garbage gimmicks in the late 80s.
Cartoon characters that would sell a lot of stuff and would be supposedly bigger than life. But the thing is, still, though, to turn a guy like One Man Gang, who was, even before he came to the WWF, people knew who he was because he was known throughout the other federations and stuff. And even his 2 years in WWF, he was a badass. And I did some searching on the internet because, you know, you want to know why, if anyone knows. The consensus among most people, and it's not cold facts, but I know looking through Wikipedia and some different little rumor sites and stuff, and on Reddit, right, they think that it was a rib against Dusty Rhodes because
of his little accent.
The American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, Akeem the African Dream, and it was a big white guy talking kind of, you know, because Dusty had that little accent and did his thing, and they think maybe that was a rib, you know, because the thing is, you look at some of those other things out there, for some reason Vince was always trying to mess with Dusty. That's why Virgil's name was what it was, and because it was a rib on Dusty.
You know, what's funny is I didn't know any of that till you just said that, but it makes perfect sense. I mean, some of the stuff that you hear nowadays that went on back then, I could totally believe that Vince designed a character just to rib Dusty Rhodes. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him one bit.
But I still, to this day, just shake my head that why you would take a character that was doing pretty well. I mean, the one thing that Akeem did, if you want to say anything, and you can talk about it, was the tag team he was part of.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's one of the more memorable tag teams just because of who they faced and when. But the Twin Towers, he and Big Boss Man.
Yep.
You know, that's a formidable duo. That's two big boys in there. And, you know, they main evented Saturday Night Main Event going against the Mega Powers, which that's infamous because that match is when Macho turned on Hogan after the match was over.
That's right.
And that is etched in my brain for as long as I live. I will always, you know, I knew right away when you said you wouldn't talk about one-man gangs, like, oh yeah, he was in Twin Towers.
Well, and the sad thing with that too is, so that happened in September of '88. He turned into Akeem. By early 1990, that tag team was done because by then Big Boss Man had broken away from Slick and had joined the $1 Million Corporation. By the end of 1990, Akeem was gone. So in about not even a 2-year period, Vince had made this change to this guy and maybe had 2 memorable moments. And it's funny because of that character, it's only really the Twin Tower tag team I remember. Didn't win any championships, didn't do anything else memorable. I mean, I know they beat the Rockers at WrestleMania, but that was really it.
Yeah, I really haven't had a chance to go back and look, you know, to do a little research or anything, but I kind of wonder, you know, digging around if you find any interviews with him on what he thinks.
Why?
On why, or if he has any hard feelings about being switched on that gimmick. 'Cause I think One Man Gang, that was a memorable gimmick. That I remember. I remember that more than I remember Akeem the African Dream.
Well, and I mean, he ended up in WCW after that and wrestled as the One Man Gang again. So it's hard telling, but he was part of that group that filed that class action lawsuit against the WWE for the concussions and stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's always one of those gimmicks that I kind of shake my head and want to know, what the hell was Vince thinking?
You know, with this idea of the gimmicks, you're really opening a Pandora's box.
Oh, I know I am. Oh, yeah. Well, and the beauty of it is that not only what you and I can think of, if anyone out there thinks of something they'd like us to chat about and try and figure out what the hell was going on, that's even better. Because you and I know there's so much stuff out there. You can go through the network and watch crap and just shake your head going, Bastion Booger. What the fuck?
That's one I deleted out of my memory. Not to drop a Woken reference, but
Yeah. There's so many.
Gobbledygooker. I mean, what in the world?
Doink, dink, and all that crap. There's so many things that pop up, and I know it's one of those things too, I think, where Vince and everyone's just throwing stuff up against the wall. Because even looking at today, the New Day probably shouldn't have been as over as they ended up being. No,
and if you remember, well, you may not have been watching it as much since my kids are getting a little older, but as much as they watched when they were younger, when New Day first came out and started doing their little clap,
yeah,
people were not having any part of it.
Well, because they first came out as a gospel group.
Yeah,
that was the
no
thing.
Part of those guys. They were like, no, this is not going to work. and then I think everyone waited for them to turn into a heel, like the Nation of Domination, you know, a heel faction. And then they went completely opposite of that. And I think that's what finally helped. But yeah, you just never know.
Well, and the funny thing is I wonder if it's true what they say a lot of times is that Vince just gives these weird gimmicks to see if someone can figure out a way to get it over. And that's kind of what I wonder. But things like this are the ones that are still head scratchers to me. When you come in with a gimmick and you let that person keep that gimmick for 2 years, you know, it would have been different if the One Man Gang had come into the Federation and they turned him whatever the hell they wanted to when they first started. This is what I'm still baffled at, and I'll have to do some more research. But what the hell? Why would you take?
Well, you mentioned Vince and the gimmicks. There's one thing I've heard over and over from Steve Austin, and that is having a relationship with McMahon and being able to talk to him on things. I heard an interview with him one day, and he was talking about, you know, when he came in as the ringmaster, and, you know, he came in, they dubbed him the ringmaster. He had like a gold chain or something.
Yeah.
And he'd do the $1 Million Dream and as his finishing and all that stuff. But this is back when they were taping TV. He noticed that they were editing out a lot of his dialogue. Anytime he would talk, when it would show, a lot of what he had to say had been taken out. And so he went to Vince and said, look, without a little attitude, for a better word, you know, without my backing up my physicality, I'm just a puppet. And so Vince started letting him talk. And then that's what led to the Stone Cold character.
Wow.
But he had to go to Vince for that. You know, he had to say, hey, I got to stand up for yourself. And so many of those guys, I think, are intimidated by Vince. And he says, you know what, tonight you're going to go out there and kiss my rear on national television to save your job. And they're like, okay. And
bunch bunch of yes men.
Yeah, and there's not, the ones who have got a relationship and are willing to talk to him on things and work with him and take the proverbial brass ring and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones, I think, who have found a way to stay relevant all these years.
All right, so as we talk about just how weird this was, if you could go back in time, what would you have done to the one-man gang instead?
Oh, instead. What is a good question. Put me on the spot, why don't you?
I know.
Well, for one, I would have left him as a one-man gang. If you think about it, they had about 3 or 4 guys that were interchangeable between Tugboat and, what was the other one?
Earthquake.
Earthquake, thank you.
Bam Bam Bigelow.
And Bam Bam Bigelow. I was getting my my big guys mixed up, but I would have left him one-man gang, and I think he would have fit in well. Put him with like Demolition or somebody. Here's a 4th guy. Have you a supersized faction or something, or leave him with Slick, but that whole African Dream thing, I don't know, a rib or not, I think you really did the guy a disservice.
Now, the one thing I never thought about, and until you were just now talking, is something that kind of popped in my head. Maybe they turned him because at that time, if I recall, the big boss man was a face, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder.
I don't remember. I just always remember him as hitting people with that nightstick and handcuff them to the ring. I don't ever remember him as a nice guy.
But what I want to say, though, is that if he was a face, why would you put a prison guard with a gang member? You know what I mean? It didn't quite, the two personas didn't jive. If you wanted to make them a tag team, I guess I could see why, but the gimmick itself didn't make sense. But I could see why you change his gimmick to make him mesh with the big boss man. But yeah, other than that, I think that truthfully, if you're going to look at rebooking the guy, don't change the gimmick. It's iconic.
I was going to say, back then in the 80s, whenever they had big pay-per-view, like they have Rumble or something, if you look around the ring, everyone looks like they're wearing a costume.
Yep.
You got a police officer, you got a gang member, you got guys that are Kiss wannabes, and one guy wants to be a barber. And you think, oh, we're out of that stage nowadays. And if you think about it, 205 Live, you got like 20 Power Rangers running around.
Mm-hmm.
So really, we're not out of the costume stage. They just changed the gimmick up a little bit.
Well, and the funny thing is you're talking about that too. Remember, he was part of that gimmick battle royal that they had at WrestleMania back. Yeah,
that was great. Boogeyman. Come out.
Well, and Bobby the Brain Heenan did the announcing for that. So
that pretty well sums up our Under the Gimmick for the month, and I look forward to the next one. Now, remember, you can always find us on Twitter. We are on Instagram. We're even on Facebook, UTRR Podcast. Be more than happy if you give us a follow.
This is ECW's enforcer, C.W. Anderson, and you got it tuned to the Under the Ring Report.
Follow the Under the Ring Report on Twitter at UTRR Podcast. You can subscribe to the Under the Ring Report on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, or visit undertheringreport.com. Thanks for listening to the Under the Ring Report.